Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when this finds you. Just want to talk a while about some other things that are kind of doing us damage in this society right now. And then I'm going to talk about some things that have been doing us damage for over the last 100 plus years from an economic standpoint. And one of the things I came across some years ago was I found out, we've been taught through our schooling about the 13th, 14th, and the 15th Amendments and slavery. But what we've never been taught was that was actually the 13th Amendment we have today is not the original 13th Amendment. The original 13th Amendment actually banned lawyers from ever entering politics. And if you look across the spectrum of politics at every level, city, state, and federal, almost all of your legislators are attorneys. Now, since most of them are attorneys, they spend their days creating laws to violate our rights as citizens and enslave us while exempting themselves from those same laws. And in essence, they have practically made basic living illegal for us because I think at any point, any given time of the day, each one of us violates over 300-400 laws, if I'm not mistaken, if they were actually enforced. Now, does that make any sense? I actually saw something earlier today, and it was, I don't know how to pronounce it, but over in India, I don't think the law is still on the books, but they used to have a law for women, some kind of breast law, and said if you paid a tax or fine, you could cover your breasts. And it was only for a certain class of Indians, the lower class Indians over in that part of the world. But if you didn't have the money to pay for it, you actually had to walk around with your breasts exposed. So this is what happens when you keep voting in legislators at every level who have no moral compass. And that's all we're doing in this country. Keep voting in people that have no moral compass, who don't care about you. But they've made basic living practically illegal for all of us. But we think they have our best interests at hand. In the midst of what we're dealing with right now, we can't get close to each other unless we take the chance to come in contact with a virus. They told us not to gather with our family. And they even had the nerve to tell us not to gather with our family for Thanksgiving and to gather for Thanksgiving via Zoom conference calls. They told us we need to stay 6 feet away from each other. They told us we need to wear masks. Well, if the masks are effective, why do we need to stay 6 feet away from each other? And if we stand 6 feet away from each other, why do we have to wear a mask? I mean, I just had an incident at the doctor's office. Nobody was within 15 feet of me. And some lady comes out the back and tells me I need to cover my nose. And I'm trying to explain to her that the mask has actually caused me health issues. And we went back and forth for quite a bit. And I just told her, okay. As soon as she walked off, I pulled the mask back down. But, and that's another issue. You give certain people some position or some semblance of authority, and they want to make sure they exercise it at all costs because power messes people up, and power doesn't mess people up. Power just exposes who the person always was. So don't listen to that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. No, the position of power just exposed who they had always been. And so let me get back to my topic and my information at hand because I'm gonna go on and talk to you about some things. But they told us not to get together. They told us to stay away from each other. And all of these things they're telling us, the people who are telling us are gathering with their family and friends. I just saw the other day, I think the day before Thanksgiving, the mayor of Denver, Colorado was actually tweeting out to his constituents for them to stay safe and not visit with their families and friends while he was actually at the airport getting ready to take a flight to come here to Houston to visit family and friends. They have forbidden worship services, but they've deemed strip clubs essential. So one pastor actually held a church service and took his tie off during the service and basically said he was a strip club because he actually removed his tie, which was an article of clothing. They're working to make it illegal for us to travel. The other day, Qantas Airlines just came out and said you won't be able to fly on any of their planes if you don't have proof and papers that you have taken a vaccine. And other airlines are actually planning to follow suit. Do you know how to get companies to change their policies? I'm not going to tell you. You can pretty much figure it out. They want to force you to get the vaccine in order to go back to work. Your livelihood is being directly threatened. And sadly, we have a lot of people in society just willing to comply. What do you think 911, 9/11 was setting the stage for? You think it was really about terrorists hijacking some planes? You got the Patriot Act right after that, and it gets renewed on a regular basis. And so they even want to keep us from buying groceries unless you take the vaccine. They're working to lock you out of your bank account if you don't take the vaccine. And the only way you can buy anything or access your money is to show proof that you've been vaccinated. Hey, for people who prefer to volunteer to get the vaccine, that should be their right. And the people who don't want it, that should also be their right. Why are we only allowed to follow one narrative? I mean, it's more than me out there, folks, that's screaming this, but you want to minimize people who are telling you, hey, we're supposed to be a free country, we're supposed to be a free society, but those of you who are willing to comply want everybody else to follow your thought process. Kind of reminds me of black people and voting Democrat. All blacks think all blacks are supposed to vote Democrat. I mean, we're supposed to be free thinkers. We're supposed to be. But the non-free thinkers, the compliant thinkers, want the free thinkers to comply. But they're talking about locking you out of your bank accounts. Your kids in college are already away from home. And college campuses have actually forced them to maintain a distance from one another on campus. Why do you think their suicide rate has jumped from 3.2% in March of this year to over 36% today? It's because we need the human touch. These kids are at a point in their life where they get out and they get a chance to meet new people from all around the country and some parts of the world. And now you're telling them they can't even do that. You've taken them away from their families. And now they can't even gather with others who are also away from home and their families and their friends that they grew up with. They have created an environment where older folks are paranoid and don't want to catch anything. So they have isolated themselves all in the name of protecting themselves. Have you paid attention to the deaths of the older folks because of the inaction and the absence of the human touch? Have you done any research on what happens when all of us, lack human touch? I'm not talking about just physical touch where we get to hug but that's important. I'm also talking about just being in the mere physical presence of others when we congregate and just have conversations. I have a friend whose grandmother is in one of those assisted living facilities. And when she visits her, she had to talk to her through the window from outside her bedroom. Is that freedom? Is that even humane? I mean, if we think about it, when we go to the zoo, the animals are separated from us via windows or cages. That's exactly what they've done to us. I saw a picture of 3 people on the elevator with the footprints pasted on the floor where they had it situated where when you get on the elevator, everybody has to face the wall. Is that freedom? Is it? And so some of you out there may say, but this is the safest way to do things. Are you sure about that? Even the CDC and the WHO have actually stated that the numbers they have been given to us have been fudged quite a bit to fit a narrative. How can a virus be so dangerous that has a recovery rate of over 90% across all age groups? In the last 12 months, I have had blood work done 5 times. Guess what my results showed when I did blood work the first time after the mask mandate? My carbon dioxide level was over the normal limit for the first time ever in my entire life of doing blood work. And I can't even tell you how many times I've had to do blood work over the course of my life, especially within the last 5 years. For the first time ever after the mask mandate, my carbon dioxide level was elevated above normal range in the high area. My blood work showed red. And in case you don't understand, red means it's high. It's too high. The previous 3 times, as I stated, just within this last 12 months, my carbon dioxide levels were always normal. Nowhere close to even being on the high end. And when my doctor looked at the results, he glossed right over that like he didn't even see it. So, since it's obvious the medical people are not concerned about our well-being, it's obvious the government is not concerned about our well-being. Guess who needs to be concerned about our well-being? We do. So I stopped covering my nose with a mask. And be honest with you, I prefer to go places where they don't expect me to wear a mask. That's just me. Allow me the freedom. It's amazing you walk in a restaurant right now and you have to wear the mask till they seat you at the table, but then you can take the mask off to eat. That's amazing, ain't it? When it's time for you to consume so you can pay, you don't have to have a mask on. But as long as you just sitting there not consuming, you have to keep a mask on. It's amazing how that works. So I stopped covering my nose with the mask. And then I did blood work again. And guess what happened? My carbon dioxide level was back normal. See, that's the aspect they don't tell you. Covering your nose actually increases your carbon dioxide level. It's poisonous to you. It's dangerous to you. It's dangerous to your respiratory system, but they're not telling you that. Because the virus is so dangerous with a 90+% recovery rate. And stop listening to these people talking about these folks died from COVID. Every last one of these folks had more than 2 or more underlying health conditions, and COVID was just something that came along later. They were going to die from those issues anyway. And I'm not making light of it. I'm just telling you, these folks were going to die from that stuff anyway. So I'm not talking about what's happened to somebody else when I talk about the carbon dioxide. I'm talking about my personal experience. Are we free in the supposed most free country in the world? Or do you not realize what slavery looks like? Because history has taught us that slaves always wore chains around their necks or around their ankles. Now, I'm going to move in another direction because I'm talking about freedom or the lack thereof. And I'll wrap it up at the end so you can understand how all of it correlates. But I'm going to move into the area of what we know as taxation. So do we have freedom? We can't live in a house without paying the government land ownership, leasing fees called property taxes. When did the government buy earth? Because if you don't pay those leasing fees called property taxes, you will be evicted. And the government will take over your property that you've paid for over years, and then they will auction it off to somebody else. When did the government buy the earth? Psalms 24:1 says the earth is the Lord's and everything that fills it, the world and all who live in it. So why are we paying for the privilege to live in a place that God says belongs to Him? See, this is what happens when government replaces God. Lawmakers have placed themselves as gods, and many of you treat them that way. So they respond in kind. Just like many of you have placed doctors on pedestals like God. So they respond in kind and don't like you as the patient to question them. See, my doctors are aggravated with me when I come in because I'm questioning them. Oh, the nurse told me when I was in the other day, she said, I knew you were going to give me problems when you came in. I said, no, I'm not giving you a problem per se. I said, but I listened to all of these medical experts. I said, and because I listened to the medical experts, I have to come see this guy for the rest of my life. I said, because he was one of the experts. I said, so I'm not upset with you. I said, because I get on him too. So let me get off of that and get back to my taxation. But I'm going to ask again. When did the government buy the earth from God? What lawmakers that were voted in thought it was such a great idea to tax people for living? If you buy a car and you pay it off, you still have to pay taxes in order to continue to drive it every year. It's called vehicle registration. It's called, down here in Texas, we also have inspection. We have to get car inspections every year as well. So a few years back, lawmakers up in the state capitol canceled the emission portion of our car inspection, which decreased the cost of the inspection by $15, but our registration cost was increased by more than 20. In years past, our registration costs would actually decrease as our vehicles got older. One lawmaker down here said he was actually working on eliminating inspection altogether, and the average citizen would see an actual total savings of about $7. So how do you take away a $25 fee, and then the people only see a savings of $7 on top of what they've already done with the registration and the portion of the inspection they were taking away? What kind of math is that? Does anybody else other than me see a problem with that? Why do we keep electing people like this? You are taxed on the gasoline you put in your vehicle. Do you really know how much your tax bill is on just 1 gallon of gas? I mean, they'll tell you it's 18.4 cents per gallon. But isn't it amazing that the government paints the oil companies as the evil ones when the taxes on each gallon of gas is actually about 40% the last time I checked? And it's been a while since I checked. But that's extremely high. So when gas prices were at $3, $4, $5 a gallon, depending on where you were in the country, your government was getting almost half of that. But the oil companies are the bad people. The oil companies are the greedy people. They sure know how to promote how many billions oil companies saw or realized in a year, but they don't tell you about the expense side of running a company. They only want to tell you what the total cost is, the total revenue that came in, but they don't tell you about, okay, after you subtracted out expenses, this is what they actually had left over. Now, if you're an employee, you're actually pre-taxed on your earnings. And what I mean by that is by the time you get your paycheck, the government has already stuck your hand in the pocket and took out what they say belongs to them. Then you're taxed on your earnings when you spend it or you buy anything. It's called sales tax. And depending on which retirement plan you choose, you're taxed either before or after. With the Roth IRA, you're taxed beforehand, and with the regular IRA, you're taxed when you withdraw. And if you decide to withdraw before retirement age, you're actually assessed another tax on it, which is called a 10% penalty. Now, if you voted for Joe Biden, I want to tell you something. Joe Biden, I mean, he's president-elect right now. Well, he's really not. That's just what the news media has said. I mean, I don't care who gets it. It doesn't even bother me at this point. But the Electoral College vote doesn't take place until December 14th. And they actually have to sometime in January before they actually announce it. But Joe Biden said one of his goals with your IRA is to tax the money, especially if you use traditional, but even with the Roth. With the traditional, he says his plan is to tax your regular IRA when you put it in and when you take it out. His goal with the Roth IRA is that you're already being taxed when you put it in, but he's going to tax you when you take it out as well. That's called double taxation. But see, your problem is y'all had to do whatever you could to get Donald Trump out of office. Let me repeat that. Joe Biden's retirement plan is double taxation on your retirement savings. Forget everything else. He is messing with your future money. He's messing with your golden years. Many states also impose a state tax on top of federal taxes. We have a Social Security tax. We have a Medicare tax. And before this current administration took office, if you didn't carry insurance, you would impose a tax called a fine for not carrying a voluntary item, insurance. And what you didn't know, because you didn't study the bill, was this tax was actually put in place to take care of the illegal immigrants' health care and needs. So if you didn't carry any insurance, you were punished, and illegal immigrants were rewarded with your dollars for their health care. Did you know that when you reach Medicare age, if you don't opt in, you will also be imposed another tax called a fine, just like with the current, Donald Trump removed that, the fine with the current insurance mandates, but you will be assessed a fine and a penalty, which is a tax for not signing up for Medicare. The church has even worked with the government to promote financial tithing, which is a tax at the church level. Your churches are now government businesses, and that is why they collect taxation every Sunday. Well, since the pandemic has started, they encourage you to pay your taxes online whenever you get a chance. Now, although tax laws were put in place to benefit business owners, lawmakers decided to even hurt those who are providing value to society, called jobs or products and services. If that company makes a profit, lawmakers created something called a capital gains tax, which says when you make this profit, the government wants more of your increase. Capital gains are what your business owners use to improve their business, their product or service, and give you raises. And you wonder why your raises are so tiny. You have to share your raise with the government, and then the government taxes you at a higher rate every time your income increases. Do you work hourly? Have you ever worked a pretty good overtime shift and got your paycheck and saw that the overtime pay was taxed at a substantially higher rate than your regular pay? I used to be a retail manager. And depending on sales for the year, I would get rewarded with a bonus. My bonus checks came separately from my regular pay, and the tax percentage on the bonus check was 35.67%. That's almost 50% of the bonus going to taxation. You have no recourse on that. The system actually works very hard to punish you when you try to be more productive. Have you figured it out yet? These people you keep voting for are so depraved in their thinking that they don't even stop punishing you when you die. There's something called estate or death or inheritance taxes. So the government comes into your descendants and tells them that they now owe the government for you achieving a degree of security and leaving it to them. This is why many people have started taking out super high life insurance policies, and they pay these high premiums because life insurance escapes taxation. And that way they can leave their descendants millions of dollars tax-free. Now, if you want to give somebody a financial gift and it's over $10,000, you got to pay taxes on that. There's also something called user fees, which are taxes that are assessed on a wide variety of services, including airline tickets, rental cars, toll roads, utilities, hotel rooms, licenses, financial transactions. I mean, you see where these people say, well, we're going to charge you a fee for using this ATM machine that's not part of our branch, and many others. And depending on where someone lives, a cell phone can have as many as 6 separate taxes, which is going to run up your monthly bill as well, upwards of 20%. The amazing thing about toll road fees, they just completed the newest one here in Houston and letting you use it free until the 30th. When is that? I guess that's tomorrow. But they just completed the new one. And your lawmakers, they're excellent at wordplay. The amazing thing about toll road fees is we pay for them to be built, and then we have to pay to use what we've already paid for. Your lawmakers tell you that if you vote for it, your taxes won't increase because the money is coming from government bonds. Well, where do government bonds come from? Taxes. And where do taxes come from? The people. Here in Houston, the previous mayor imposed a new tax on wastewater, water that goes out your house. And we actually pay more for water leaving our home than we do for the water we actually use. My dad worked for the city of Houston for 33 years before he retired. And he actually worked in the wastewater department when the previous department he worked in shut down. And when this happened, he told me the mayor is lying because there has always been a separate account for the tax she was imposing, a separate account for water and wastewater, which was separate from taxation on the people of the city. Now, there's something we've heard of, some of you have heard of, called sin taxes, which are imposed on items like cigarettes and alcohol. And in some areas around the country, you also have a soda tax. So if you want a carbonated drink, you have to pay a tax. Now, I have a customer who lives in Washington State, and whenever she buys certain one of my products, and it's delivered to her in Washington State, I get a notification that I owe taxes in a state for the items I sold up there, because there's a separate tax on that item. And I gladly I accept that and make sure it's taken care of. But why is something like that even in place? Then you have something called luxury taxes, which are imposed on certain items such as expensive cars, maybe a Ferrari, Lamborghini, Bentley, Rolls Royce, and things like that, or jewelry. Now, if you invest your money and it earns a gain, you have to pay taxes on that increase. Now the government wants to use Old Testament teachings. And most everyone have heard of the feminist movement. And we've heard all the lies as to why it was actually started and what was the reasoning for it. And yes, everything you heard about it was a lie. The real reason the movement was created was to take the mothers out of the home and add more people to the taxpayer roll. That's right. They wanted more people to pay taxes to the Federal Reserve System, which is not federal, which means it's not a government entity, which means it's private. And so as we look at all the taxes that are imposed on us, is it any wonder why we don't have much discretionary income to live on? And we have to shrink our lifestyle. Because have you figured out, you might be able to get out of debt, go and get a second job, but I mean, you want to work 2 jobs your whole life? I mean, just a question. We're actually at a point in time where once you add up every type of tax we have to pay, 50% of all of our earnings are going to one tax or another. Let me make you sick. Based on how many taxes we pay, we are literally working until August before we actually start working for ourselves. Because from January to July, we're actually working for the government only. The great majority of our so-called financial experts tell us we need to cut back, although they miraculously continue to find ways to increase their income. There are a few financial experts out there who tell us that we should do what we can to increase our income. But amazingly, I have actually seen people make fun of them. And you know what? The people who are making fun of them don't have any financial fruit on their own tree. Now, you have to go back and study how taxation came into being in this country. Poor people went to their lawmakers and said that the rich should be taxed for their wealth, and the lawmakers obliged them. Because see, everything was being taken care of in this country by tariffs back then. And just so you know, everything today can be taken care of tariffs if you really start reining in government misuse and spending. But poor people went to the government and told them they should tax those evil rich people. And I mean, you had some guys out there back then that were doing some pretty dirty things, and but I'm not here to talk about all that. You have to do your own research and go back to that industrial age when it first kicked off, and see the steel industry and the railroad industry and the electric lighting and things like that. And I mean, you know who those people are, but go do you some research on them. I mean, that's even if you're interested. Well, poor people went to the government and said, tax these evil rich people. And what poor people need to understand, because poor people and rich people don't think the same way. I'm not putting you down. I'm just stating a fact. Rich people don't become rich by being stupid. So what they did was created new companies to shelter their wealth, and the government ended up imposing a tax on everyone. So the people who thought punishing the rich was a great idea ended up being the ones hurt by their own ideas. You know, it's kind of like people moving to Texas from California right now because of the oppressive taxation they voted for. And then they want to bring that same mentality that they voted for, that they're trying to escape from, here with them. Now ask yourself again, are you free? If you choose not to comply with all of the tyrannical taxes, you are threatened with seizure of money from your bank account, seizure of your property, them freezing your assets, or even prison time. Are you free? A lot of people say taxes are what we pay to live in a civilized society. Well, if we're going to base it on that, all of us will do a large tax refund. I've heard many people say we need to pay taxes to handle a lot of the things in the country, like bridges and roads and things like that. Well, as I stated earlier, before taxes came into being, everything in this country was paid for based on tariffs and imports from other countries and things like that. Because if the country wants their goods to come, send their goods into this country and sell for a profit, they have to pay a fine. You have to pay a fee. And so it's kind of like when I signed up for a book event, you know, I had to pay for booth space. And anytime you see an event going on, the people that have booths there always have to pay for space at that event. Because the money that we pay for booth space actually pays for the event. It pays for the venue. It pays for the people that have to work. So that's what imports and things like that took care of. So are you free? If we have all this revenue coming in from tariffs and imports, and all this revenue coming in from taxation, how did this country get so far in debt? I mean, I know the answer to it, and many of you do too, but I want to stay on these taxes. See, we've been misled by our religious leaders when they translate Romans 13 improperly. Part of the reason the church loves big government is because they have failed in their obligations to mankind. The Gates Foundation wants your religious leaders to encourage their congregants to get the vaccine because they know if your pastor or your bishop or your priest says it, most of you will follow their lead. My wife and I were watching a sermon about a month ago, and the pastor said when the vaccine becomes available, he and his wife will be the first ones in line. So apparently the Gates Foundation had already contacted him. Is that not promoting the vaccine from the pulpit? He has made it clear over and over and over again that he wants to get back to full meetings in person. On the flip side, the message at the church is if you plan on attending, you must wear a mask in order to make others comfortable. Well, what if wearing a mask makes me uncomfortable? Do all of the things being promoted right now seem to lean to only one way of thinking? And if you don't fall into that way of thinking, you are the problem? And yes, I am on pastors again. Many of these pastors have said we're supposed to obey governing authorities. Well, depends on which version of the Bible you're reading, because the translation that many Christians don't like anymore, which is the King James translation, says to obey higher powers. The Douay-Rheims, I pulled my Douay-Rheims Bible, it says to obey higher powers. The New American Standard Version says let everyone obey the authorities that are over him. Now, a child cannot obey every father out there, but the only father who has rule over the child is that child's father. And so when Paul wrote these words in Romans, he was only talking to the called out ones, the ecclesia. He wasn't talking to all of society. The rest of society that doesn't believe have their own higher authority that they listen to. Paul was saying that believers should be in subjection to those who are gathered within the assembly as ministers. And we need to study and see who is actually declared as a minister. Paul never said to subject yourself to Caesar's minister, which is the government. Governing authorities and higher powers are not the same thing. Is it any wonder why we keep thinking government is God? So if the government, is the government the higher power? Because Acts 10:32 says God is no respecter of persons. So how can government be the higher authority if God said he is no respecter? What if the governing authorities' rules and laws contradict God's laws? Are you still going to listen to the improper translation and obey the governing authorities because Romans 13:1 has not been properly taught and understood? Because if we're going to go with that narrative, that we're supposed to obey government because verse 1 said so, how do we translate verse 8 in that same chapter? Verse 8 says to owe no man nothing. So if we're in a constant state of taxation, we're always in a state of perpetual bondage to the government, which means we owe them all the time. So we violate scripture with scripture in the same chapter. Where they do that at? 1 Corinthians 14:33 says God is not the author of confusion, but apparently our preachers are. Believers are supposed to obey and subject themselves to the higher powers, and non-believers are supposed to subject themselves to the governing authorities. Again, not the same thing. Governing authorities are of this world. What do we always teach? We are in the world, but not of the world. What does John 12:31 say? Satan is the ruler of this world. And Colossians 1:13 says we are no longer under Satan's rule. Now, am I telling you not to pay taxes? No, I'm not telling you that at all. I'm telling you that we've been misled and we've been bamboozled because we're ignorant. Because if we weren't ignorant, and not just us, our ancestors and our ancestors' ancestors and our ancestors' ancestors have all been ignorant. We're ignorant of our Bible and we're ignorant of government. And because of our ignorance, these two institutions keep destroying us, not the Bible, the church, the preacher's institution. I want to clear that up. I don't want y'all to think the Bible is, because the Bible never changes. Translations change, but you got to get back to them old original Bibles. So I don't want you to make the mistake and think I'm saying the Bible is a bad thing. I'm saying the preachers and the churches have done us a disservice. But because these two institutions, the church and government, are destroying us, and they're leading us into more and more bondage. And because we're ignorant, we keep electing ignorant people to be in charge of us and to handle our affairs at the political level. And the more ignorant they are, the worse things get, which is what we're experiencing. And then we get a more ignorant person to run at the new election cycle. And we keep drifting, as Napoleon Hill calls it in one of his books. What does taxation have to do with the virus? The same thing it has to do with all of these so-called natural disasters that keep getting more intense as each year goes. We're living right in the midst of what happens when you have government tyranny and government overreach. And the virus and taxes have placed us in all types of bondage and slavery. We have been pushed right into a situation that's going to be hard to come out of if we don't stand up at some point real soon. How many businesses have had to shut their doors since this thing started? How many cars have been repossessed since this thing started? How many people have been evicted or getting ready to be evicted when they start the new eviction notices in January 2021? What do you think hurricanes, tornadoes, and forest fires are all about? I mean, sure, some things are natural, some. What do you think they're about? Do you really think that all of these megastorms are actually naturally occurring? The objective is to keep breaking people financially to the point where they beg government to come in and save them and protect them from these future events that they created in the first place. Government creates the problem and then offers you the solution because they're trying to break you. There are 16 storm creation facilities around the world. You didn't know that, did you? Now, have you ever heard the term universal basic income? The first time you might have heard about it, most of you was probably when potential presidential candidate Andrew Yang was talking about it. But I have some information that proves universal basic income has been talked about for decades. Andrew Yang was just the first one to be willing to announce it publicly. And what universal basic income means is everybody gets the same monthly pay. Well, except your legislators and the elites. Have you ever wondered how a congressperson earns a salary of about $175,000 a year and has a net worth of 100+ million? What kind of math is that? Give me some of that math. Do you realize how many years, even at that rate of pay, they would have to work to have that type of net worth? Don't tell me they came into office with that net worth, because the average net worth when a person enters Congress is about $180,000. Yeah, I researched that too. But do you really know what universal basic income is? It is socialism. Or better yet, it's slavery. And what do you have? What do you hear a lot of your Democratic politicians preaching? Socialism. But they try to dress it up and call it democratic socialism. Because see, when you start mentioning the word Democrat or democracies or democratic, what automatically translates into your mind is making it beneficial for everybody. But that has nothing to do with it. They're just trying to dress up and give socialism a new name. You ever wondered why the communist and socialist parties have actually joined forces with the Democratic Party, and you still think you're voting for a Democratic Party? Now, do you know why it's called universal basic income? Because when you get it, you will only be able to afford basic necessities and live a basic life that has been predetermined for you. You will be provided a basic income. But the part they don't tell you is that at the point you're given that income, what you're going to see come on the backside is something called hyperinflation, which means you won't even be able to afford the basic necessities like bread, like beans and rice, and forget even buying meat. But hey, what do I know?